Have you ever wondered when the school came to be? Last night I did. Now, according to the University of Google, apologies to my distinguished panelists, universities, perhaps the earliest form of school was developed in Egypt's Middle Kingdom. That's somewhere between 2061 and 2010, before Christ. Then there was Mesopotamia, where the cuneiform script was developed. Only the rich and royal sons were trained. Where am I going with this, you may wonder? Well, from the limited number of individuals who could be trained in cuneiform, we've come a long way in education, to education of the masses. Then along came COVID, and we have the transformation of education on a scale perhaps that we have never seen, which is why we're here today. Let's meet our panelists.
Professor Gary Martin, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director, Australian Institute of Management, Western Australia. Dr. Curti Menon, Senior Director, Division for Teaching Excellence, University of Johannesburg. Professor Seth Coonan, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Global, Curtin University. Professor Mark Smith, President and Vice-Chancellor, University of Southampton. And the moderator is CNBC Africa Editor-in-Chief, Godfrey Mutizwa.
Thank you, Jill. There you have it. Often I think we say that my distinguished panelists, I can tell you that my panel is distinguished, as you heard one from the titles. But I promise you, as you will hear from the conversations that are going to unfold from here today. So what we did was, we had a little meeting before we came together. And in that little meeting, I posed two questions to my panelists. The first question I put to them was, is digital transformation positive or negative for education? That was one. Then the second question for them was, has COVID-19 been positive for education or negative? And then we sort of played around with it a little bit, because what we then did was to take those same two questions onto online, on LinkedIn. I shall be bringing you the results from that poll, but at the same time, I'm also going to be bringing you the results of my little poll on my panelists. Let me bring them in. Professor Martin, I'm going to start with you. Welcome, by the way. Good morning. Good evening. I know you are in Australia, so it's getting into the early evening. I want to begin, first of all, with your response to my first question.
Yeah, so I think what's happened when we went online or virtually when the pandemic hit is we did compromise quality. I think there's no question that we compromised quality. What we saw is students quite unhappy with the whole online situation. In fact, our regulator called TEXA, which is a Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, conducted some research with students, and the overwhelming response from students who participated in the research was that they were unhappy with an online environment. There's no question that that happened. There's a number of reasons for that as well, and one of them was the reduced interaction between academics and peers. There was also some difficulty with information technology, complications with translation of some of the subject matter that was in regular classrooms. It was difficult to suddenly put that online. And there was also that student isolation. Many students lacked motivation, general lack of engagement, and they felt like there was this set and forget mentality. And that's only because all of this happened quickly. What we had in classrooms around the world and in Australia was not necessarily suitable just to be thrown online. And that's what happened, and that's why it did compromise quality.
On a scale of 1 to 5, what is your score, sir? On the first question.
Well, 1 is low. For this question, Godfrey?
On the first one.
Yeah, so I scored this 2. meaning low quality.
Low quality, low quality. That's it too. Let me go to Professor Kunin. Professor Kunin, are you there? You have muted. If you could unmute. Yeah, you're in.
Leave it again.
I can hear you.
My machine keeps muting me. I'm not sure why. Hopefully you can hear me now.
I can hear you now.
Right. So we see here some of the issues connected with digital transformation, that sometimes the technology doesn't work exactly as we would hope it would work. And that itself was one of the major problems in looking at what happened with COVID. So if you ask me, it's really the second question, I think, what was the impact of COVID on the digital delivery of education? I would agree with the first speaker that in many cases, for many universities, the delivery of digital education over the last 2 years had issues. And many of those issues were already identified. But I think I'd like to bring out one other issue, which is also why digital education can be positive and not negative. And that is that when we designed the material that was delivered over the last 2 years, as mentioned, that material tended to be designed for face-to-face delivery. It wasn't designed for online delivery. And because of that, it didn't make use of all of the facilities that online delivery has, which enables it to be interactive, which enables it to be engaging, which enables it to reach a wide audience. It actually didn't use those elements, and therefore it didn't have the right educational experience. Students felt disengaged, students felt unconnected. But if we had been able to have the time to design those programs using all of the technology that's available, and as COVID progressed, so into the second year, more and more programs were actually using that technology. More and more programs were using how do we mediate between those bits of the online experience in which there's a tutor speaking with the students. How do we mediate those aspects of the online experience where the students are doing it themselves so that they have an excellent mixed experience? We found actually students were getting a better and better experience. So the fundamental issue for me is that what COVID revealed is that we can do it. We can get large number of students studying online. It also revealed that if we want to do that successfully, we have to have the right materials for the right medium. So when we teach online, we have to use materials that are designed to teach online. And when we teach face-to-face, we have to use materials that are designed to teach face-to-face. When we do either of those very well, then the student experience is excellent. And that's fundamental. So COVID showed us that we can do it. COVID showed us that there are students out there who can engage with it, but it also showed us what we need to learn so that we do it better.
It sounds to me like it's going to be difficult to score this one. I do need your score there. And what I see you have done is to blend the two questions. Impact of COVID on digital delivery on education. Give me your score, sir.
So I would say for both questions a 3, that they can be either bad or good, depending on how we focus on what we're doing. They can be good if we really develop the technologies, if we really develop the interactive experience for students to engage with them, but they can be terrible if we just try to give them the same kind of material that we've always done.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. The poll online, of course, is ongoing, so you can still go in and vote in. I'm looking at the results here, and they are really changing as we are moving along, especially on the second part, because at the beginning we had 50-50. Now I am seeing a swing. I'm not going to tell you which way it's going at the moment, because we're going to bring those results a little later on. Let me bring in Dr. Menon. Ma'am, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. So I think the COVID pandemic provided an opportunity for us to think afresh about new digital, online, and pedagogical possibilities but we were in a position where we had to ensure pedagogical continuity of education. For South Africa, we were at the beginning of our academic year. What we found is that the new technologies offered the opportunity to enhance, but yet at the same time created a limitation on access. And I say this because of the digital inequalities which exist in our society. We also had very little time to do planning of teaching and learning, both in relation to configurations of knowledge, approaches to teaching and learning, and understanding the context of both academics as well as our students. So even though there are immense possibilities for online pedagogies, but it cannot happen unplanned and ad hoc. Many of our disciplines require a particular sequence of activities which do not often lend themselves to being simply placed in an online space. We also had to consider the very, very critical issue that with limited bandwidth, with uneven technology devices, with the difficulties of students being in remote areas, this actually was impacting on the teaching and learning experience. But what I found extremely valuable in the entire pandemic period was that we began understanding the role of students as co-knowledge producers, empowering them and creating greater independence to seek answers, to work collaboratively. And this was a very important gain. The second aspect that we saw was the creation and absolute innovation on the parts of universities, where new technologies, the usage of TikTok, the usage of Instagram, the usage of WhatsApp groups, WeChat, in order to engage the students, created what I would call the sociality of the encounter, especially critical given the fact that the loneliness of the pandemic must not be undermined. And so what we saw in this period was a bringing together of academics and students and a narrowing of the gap that normally exists between the academic and the student. And I think that that has provided us with some fodder for thinking about the future of higher education, how we move forward, how we rethink our pedagogies, and how we make use of technologies going forward.
Yeah. Sounds to me like COVID-19 inadvertently may have dragged us screaming, because we didn't want COVID around us, into a future that may improve things. I need your mark, ma'am.
So I was a sitting on the hedge person. And so I did a 3.5 for both, but at the same time, I said with reservation.
With reservation. Professor Martin, I wanted to say to you, I'm also going to allow you to blend the two questions if you like, but I see for Dr. Menon, it's not going to make a difference because she is sitting smack bang close to the middle. Lastly, let's hear from Professor Smith.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for the invitation to take part today. So I'll start with my score, so you don't have to ask me at the end, Godfrey. And I'm afraid that Curtie's pinched my answer because my equivalent is to not the hedge but the fence. I was going to say I'm sitting on the fence because I'm going to give you a 3 for both of them. Okay. And the problem is, you've illustrated perfectly the problem of reducing a question to one number. because that 3 is an average of a 1 and a 5. Because I think there were some things, I think there were bits of it that were 1 and bits of it that were 5, and therefore end up with the 3. However, let me explain why. And I agree. I think my colleagues have illustrated very well some of the key issues that we've come across. So I won't repeat them, but I'll make a couple of other points perhaps. I think what COVID has done is it's forced us to think at a much more accelerated pace about the role of digital. But it's also done something more fundamental than that, in that it's asked us to think about very carefully what is the overarching way and things that universities deliver. And what I mean by that is we've concentrated about the pedagogy in the classroom, but of course the education a university provides is much, much broader than that. There's all of the other interactions, the clubs. One of the things that we found was that the thing that people really, as students really missed, was the fact that a lot of the social, and I mean the broader elements of social, taking parts in societies and all those types of things, became absent, and the substitution of them online was a very poor substitute. And therefore, the question is, what is the overall education that you provide at a university? It's the course, it's the curriculum, but it's much more than that as well. So I think that's point one. Point two is, I think, and Curti made this point really clearly, I hadn't appreciated how broad the ability to access digital was within the community. And it really showed how in the kind of early 21st century, the digital infrastructure, not only at university, but the way society in general is able to experience the world. You know, if I think about the number of times I go into a bank now, it's never. But there's some people who still can't do that. And therefore, I think we have to translate that into the inequalities there are within our student population as well. And one of the things we did very early on in the pandemic was try and understand how broad that divide was. And I think countries that make their kind of infrastructure much more widely available, just as you'd expect water and food, now power, all of those types of things. I think the digital infrastructure is another one of those really basic needs of society. And I think we have to look at it in that way. And perhaps the third point to make is about the way that individual countries think about their system. So if you think about the UK, I'll make a claim here, which then someone can tell me is wrong, which is, of course, we were thinking about online, because it wasn't online then, it was delivered remotely when the Open University was formed many years ago. Effectively, what that challenged any system to think about is that not all universities should look the same. The way they deliver the education doesn't need to look the same. And what is the right mix of a particular higher education economy for a particular nation? There are many other things we could talk about. I think the way that branch campuses interact with their home campus will be changed because of what's happened under COVID. And another thing we could talk about is the integrity of the examination process, which I think was one of the biggest weaknesses under COVID. So there's lots of things it taught us and plenty to talk about.
Absolutely. I'm curious, though, as to what you scored 5 and what scored 1 in your analysis.
Okay, well, there are many bits. So I would say the 5 is the ability of universities to transform very quickly. You know, universities are supposed to be these very slow-moving, not changing organizations that get hung up with bureaucracy and all that. I think that what COVID showed is when needs must, universities can be very flexible. And one of the things that I've tried to keep within our system, not wholly successfully, I would say, is some of those rapid changes. So we were forced to learn a lot quickly, I think was very good. Sure. And the way that staff and students adapted was fantastic, really. So I would say that's. I think the 1 is basically things around, as I say, the realization that you couldn't deliver this to all people equally, and that I have to say came as a bit of a surprise to me. I also think that I've hinted at it in one of the things we could talk about. I think what it really tested was the with more and more more and more examination being done remotely. What is the real integrity of those examinations? And there was a very recent survey, literally in the last 10 days in the UK, which was asking students, and there was the figures say that 1 in 6 would say in some form they cheat within an examination. That's a frightening statistic, really.
It absolutely is. And in fact, it reminds me of what I've also done in trying to recruit interns, or people that we need for, we were looking for someone that we could use on our online space. And I resorted to saying, come and watch our channel. This is the story that I want you to listen to. I want you to write for me 4 paragraphs and send that to me in 20 minutes. If you're able to do it, truly, you are doing it. But yeah, to your point, I was worried about that possibility that I might end up with the wrong apple. Professor Martin, I wanted to come back to you and give you the opportunity to blend the number that you have to those questions, because I think I wasn't clear at the beginning whether you were scoring the first one or the second one, or you're scoring both.
Yeah, so I did score them differently. The 2 questions, I would have to go for a 3 then for the second question. So overall, I would give it 3 as well. I think we've got a lot more work to do, though, before we get up to a 4 or a 5. And I think that there's a lot more engagement with students that's needed. We need to talk to students a lot more. I find it really interesting also that in Australia, there were universities that took away lectures, and students demanded that they came back. So I don't think it's all as rosy. That's why I didn't obviously score a 5 along the way. But there's a lot of pushback from students, and I don't think we perhaps have explored exactly what students want in their experience as well. So 3 overall for me, because I think we've got a lot more work to do across the board.
But there is no question that this has been positive. I've just done a little bit of analysis on my part, and adding up all those numbers, and I think you can also do the same. We're certainly over the hump, if you like, i.e. above 2.5, which would be the halfway point. So positive impact. All right, I wanted to share with you the results of the little poll that we read on Twitter overnight, and as I said, it's still running on CNBCAfrica.com. And of course, if you would like to participate, please do still go ahead and post in your vote. And of course, we're also going to open the panel to comments from all over the world to the people who are watching. So on to the question, has the move to online education improved education? We gave 2 options. We gave a yes and we gave a no. At the moment, the yeses have it, 54%. The no's are slightly down, as you would know, 46%. And then on the second question, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on education? 2 options were given again. First option was democratized education. Second option was compromise quality. And I think the interesting things for us is that those themes have also come up in the points that have been made by the professors about the challenges and some of the opportunities that have been brought by COVID-19 on education. And on that poll, to Professor Smith's point, compromise quality is running ahead slightly, 51.5%, i.e. the impact of COVID-19 on education has compromised quality. And I think he's just spoken about the need for the integrity for examinations. The Democrats, i.e. it has democratized education, are in at 48.5%. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. Keep those votes coming in. We'll continue to update them as time moves on. Now, we need just to delve a little bit into some of the issues that all of you have raised in the first parts of the discussion. And I want to talk about the inequality part and ways in which we can be positive about the opportunity that's been created and how we close that inequality gap. Can I start with you, Dr. Menon?
So There are two critical aspects that come into play in the South African environment. And I do think that research indicates that it's not just South Africa. There are several other countries that have a similar problem. One is, should we be in a completely digital environment? We have to be absolutely sure that our students have equal access to technology and sufficient bandwidth, and as well as that their learning spaces should be appropriate. In other words, if you are sitting in a little rural village and are unable to access your learning, then all our digital transformation, it's a mockery. So I think we have to think through that absolutely carefully. Secondly, universities have to think through how we organize curriculum, how we organize teaching and learning, how we organize our assessment. But it's not just about the organizational aspect of it. It's also about thinking through the pedagogical intent underpinning everything that we do. So, what is it that we are trying to make our students do? What is it and how are we doing it? And these are absolutely critical questions because we cannot see technology as a replacement for the classroom encounter. We cannot see the entire experience of being at a university. There are several discussions about the kind of hidden curriculum. So, for example, at my university, we have a rich array of activities that are provided to the students, where the students engage, academics engage, and these all contribute towards what is a university education about. So we can't absolutely take technology as being the only solution, but it requires a rethinking and a greater orientation towards being far more student-centered than it is at the moment.
I.e., we need to use technology better. Let me come to you, Professor Kunin. I think you would have been gratified to know that that saying, that great minds think alike, certainly was demonstrated here without question. I wanted your thoughts on the issue of inequality, but I also wanted to ask you to, if you could, to answer the other point that was raised by Professor Smith around the integrity of education with the move forced in many cases to online.
I think the inequality issue is, as mentioned, very significantly related to issues of bandwidth, issues of access, and issues of appropriate study locations, as mentioned by the last speaker. And for that reason, what we need to do is look at, if we're going to be delivering online, how do we ensure that the materials that we deliver can be accessed on any device in even situations where low bandwidth is available. So we're going to have to really look at the nature of what we're delivering, the shape of what we're delivering, and ensure that it can be received wherever people need to be receiving it, and work with governments to ensure that people have the bandwidth necessary, they have the equipment to access the learning, and where appropriate, study centers in different locations to enable them to be able to access that educational material. So I think that that's one aspect of inequality. There's a second aspect that's inequality of education and inequality of educational delivery. One of the risks of moving to the online space is that it refocuses educational delivery to the delivery of information. So that rather than being interactive, rather than it being problem related, rather than it being student focused and student centered, which are much more easily done when you have people in the same room, it becomes much easier just to have information being delivered online and students passively or a little bit actively relating to that information. And if it's just about information, then that's a very impoverished form of education.
Sure.
Education is much more than just engaging with information. It's actually challenging that information. It's creating that information. It's drawing from that information and doing new things with it. And that can only be done in a very interactive setting, which again, issues of bandwidth, but also issues of imagination can prevent being done properly. It can be done online properly, but it takes work and it takes skill in designing those kinds of programs.
Yeah, I was actually going to say you may
I
need
think
greater
the issue,
training.
yes, but the issue of integrity is clearly also an ongoing issue. But I'd like to take it in a different direction. And I think maybe your statement about what you've done is actually a different answer. We have integrity issues when we use examinations and we use forms of assessment that arise from the face-to-face modes of delivery, where we can have students in a room sitting an exam. Maybe the problem is with the exam and the method of examination rather than the integrity of students. We need to rethink, what are examinations for? What are they doing? How can we redesign a whole different suite of examination forms and ways of assessing the achievement of students that don't create those kind of integrity issues? And I think that that's going to be the real solution, rather than having all of these new devices. They have cameras on students' computers that detect movement. They have all of these intrusive technologies that try to enhance integrity. But it's not really about that. It's about saying we have an opportunity to rethink examination, to rethink assessing what students' achievement is. And I think that's what we need to do.
I like that. I like that. I really like that. And I wrote it here. What's an examination for? And I think it goes to the other issue that we were discussing with Fifi at the beginning of the program, where we were asking the question, what's a degree for? What is it supposed to do for you? Excellent. Thank you, sir, very much. I want to add another theme to that one. And as we move to Professor Smith, if I am being fair here, let me see in my piece of paper here. Yes, to Professor Smith. Professor Smith, feel free to respond to the other issues that have been raised by the others as quickly as you can while addressing this specific question around also rethinking the philosophy around education. We're talking about the changes that have been wrought by the technology, but do we also rethink our philosophy around education?
Yeah, so I think that in the last comments that Seth made, he raised a really important point, which is all around the way that attainment is assessed, because I think that's really important, and that eventually technology will help us rethink that, and the role of the examination, I ask questions, you answer, that type of thing, I think is really going to be something that technology helps us, because you know, the idea between kind of formative and summative assessment, although that clearly will continue to be true, there will be distinctions there. In a way, as technology becomes more pervasive, the ability to understand what an individual student is learning and their ability to make use of that learning, which effectively is what you're trying to do in an educational course, it'll become much more pervasive as to how you're able to understand that. But that's looking I think a few years off. I think one thing we should just remember, going back to the very original question you posed, Godfrey, was about the benefits that have occurred. And one of the things is that the ability for students to have different ways of being able to engage with the courses, and also to be able to kind of look back. So, for example, lecture capture is something that's been ongoing for quite a number of years now. Many universities have done that slowly, some much more advanced than that. What COVID did was it absolutely accelerated that. And what students now do is they can say, oh, I didn't quite understand that. I can go back and look at it in my own time. They can do it at their own pace. So this idea about student-paced, student-centered learning becomes much easier when you have a blend. But what they are suspicious of, and I think to a certain extent, they're right to be suspicious of, is the use of it as a direct replacement for the other elements which they really value. Of course, the interaction with the teacher face to face, the ability to have, small classes where you debate, and that type of thing, and all of those things. So it's the blend that I think is really important, and I think that's the thing we've got to grapple with: is what is the best mixture that we take from the learnings that we've come out of COVID.
Absolutely. I'm going to open up the discussion to questions from our viewers, as I said, who are watching from all around the world. We've got a question here from Ella Gandhi. I was going to say she is asking. So the question is, I have observed that when it came to examinations in using virtual platforms for examination, the open book method was used by many institutions. Are we looking at the possibility of open book exams as a method for the future? I ask this because some of the educationists have indicated the importance of open book exams as a means of developing knowledge rather than memorizing knowledge. I'm going to open it. Who wants to take it? Or who wants to take it first? And we can go through everybody. Okay, I think we've got two. All right, let's go. Can I start with you, Dr. Menon?
So I think what we are in right now, as rightfully pointed out by several of our speakers, is that assessment is under review. We have to think through assessment and what it means. But open book exams are a positive move, but don't work for every single discipline. And so I don't think one can have a blanket approach towards assessment by saying all assessments will be open book. But I do think that it can be very conducive in particular disciplines, but not as a blanket open book for all disciplines.
Professor Kunin? Can you hear me, Professor Kunin?
No, I couldn't hear you, but now I can.
Sure. Go for it.
I mean, my answer is similar, but I'd like to take it in a slightly different direction, which is, what is the main difference between an open book exam and a non-open book exam? And the non-open book exam fundamentally is saying, I am here to test whether you know things, whether you know specific information. An open book exam is there to say, we're not out to test whether you have certain information. What we're out to do is to ask, can you use that information critically to answer different types of questions? So the key issue in changing exam type is not necessarily whether it's open book or closed book. It's saying, let's move away from online examinations that are about testing what you know. What you know, you can always cheat about. How you know, how you use what you know, how you critically assess what you know in any discipline is always going to be something that it's much harder to cheat about.
Sure.
And for me, that's what an open book exam or any other type of exam that's problem oriented allows us to do.
Yeah. In my head, I'm thinking, thank you, COVID. You're making us ask questions of the things that we have assumed over the years to be working. And we are asking, should they continue? Should we transform them? Should we change them? We're certainly seeing the transformative impact of digital transformation on education. I wanted still to hear from all of you the issue around philosophy when it comes to education and the impact that we are seeing coming out of the digital transformation. I don't think I have heard from Professor Smith, nor have I heard from Dr. Menon on that front.
Well, okay,
Professor Smith?
Yes? Yeah, sure, thanks, Coffee. I think that the key thing is it's a point we've already made, which is the philosophy is you use all of the approaches that you have available to come up with the best course. And what COVID did was it really accelerated us understanding that. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, again, about technology, we've talked about, and I think we really fundamentally have to ask about the way we understand what real learning and understanding a student acquires. And there are more sophisticated ways of doing that. We're beginning to explore those now. But the two other things we haven't kind of touched on. One is the interaction of technology to bring universities closer together that are geographically remote. And I think more the ability to dip into courses and come up with agreements whereby universities collaborate, and you get a scaling effect that is much more possible from technology than it would be from a physical transfer. I think needs to be thought about. And then there's the broader way that technologies. I mean, the term that's used is learner analytics, and the ability to understand how people are engaging in the course. That's different from the learning outcomes and trying to understand the pedagogy. But of course, the reason many students in the end do not succeed is not because of the content, but because of other factors in their lives, such as well-being and all of those types of things, which technology should allow you to spot earlier. Now, that doesn't mean you've got some kind of sinister spying going on, but it does mean that there's a whole lot of information that can be gathered that can be used in a very positive way to try and understand that, because the earlier the intervention, the more likely it is to be successful. So going back to your point about the philosophy of education, I think that the 2 points that I draw out of what I've just said is the ability to have different models of interacting with different institutions, I think will philosophically change, or could philosophically change, and also the ability to use technology to intervene earlier in a whole range of other ways that are not directly educationally centered, but impact on how effective a student is engaging with the university.
Sure. The other question we haven't spoken about is the issue of competition that's been created through COVID-19 and the change that we are seeing in the move to technology. Perhaps calling it competition is the wrong way. Perhaps it's more the opportunity, because we've certainly seen universities able to cross boundaries without leaving their physical campuses. I wanted to give you a few comments that are coming through from people who are watching the program, those at least that are interacting with me. And we have got here Sibusiso Joannis. He says, I subscribe to your thoughts, Prof, and he is referring here to Professor Kunin from Curtin University. Let me see if I can find another comment here. A lot of people are retweeting, but that's part of the thing, isn't it? We want people to engage. We want people to give us their thoughts. Let's address the issue around competition. Professor Martin, I'm coming to you for this one, and of course it's open to everyone. How important has been the ability of universities such as yours to cross borders and create competition in my little Namibia, where otherwise I'd have been stuck with the University of Namibia?
Well, I think what it does is using technology, it opens it up to everyone. I can go and study wherever I want in the world just by staying at my desk with an online experience, if it's a good online experience as well. But what I think we're really going to see in terms of competition, if we take this to the extreme, is what might be called the smart university. And a smart university is completely different to what we have at the moment. The smart university is student-centered. We keep talking about student-centeredness, but having exams isn't really an element of being student-centered at all, even as an open book. So in a totally student-centered type of arrangement, a smart university, we wouldn't have times where we would enrol. We'd enrol whenever we wanted to. We wouldn't have assessment dates or when we had to hand in assignments or projects or do exams. We'd do it when we wanted to. We would get a lot more choice about what we wanted to do. If we wanted to go in on a campus, we would go into a campus. If we wanted to do it purely online, we'd do that as well. A smart university is an anytime, anywhere university, and that's really going to open things up. It's not here yet, but it might be in 5 years' time where you can basically study from wherever you are at any time at your own pace completely, and none of the exam business that students actually don't like anyway. So, there's those opportunities. And in terms of bankrolling some of these sorts of things,
Yeah.
I'm sitting back listening to the comments and so on as well. It's almost like we're embracing technology so much, we won't need physical campuses, or we won't need a lot of the rooms on these physical campuses that we've got around the world. We'll be able to sell them off or not build new buildings and invest in a smart university potentially.
Smart university, It sounds smart. It sounds smart. Dr. Menon, you don't mind the Australians coming in? I know that our South African companies have gone to Australia. Many, if not the majority, have been burned.
So I think the usage of technology to build partnerships has always been underestimated. And over the last 2 years, I have collaborated, and so has my university, across countries that both for students, for academic exchange, for partnering, for sharing of resources, for building research collaborative ventures, for even engaging in virtual tours. So I'm not sure about the competition. The competition in higher education will always be there. The race will always be someone's in the running. But I think that what has come to the fore is more than competition, has been really deep collaboration. And for that, I think, we have crossed almost a bridge. And I think that the future is, there are infinite possibilities for deeper collaborative networks. So, yeah.
Collaboration rather than competition is the way to look at it. We're running out of time, so I need your closing thoughts, lady and gentlemen, and I'm going to begin with the ladies. I have you online. So net from your side, Dr. Menon, we are on the right path. We just need to make sure we use the technology better, right?
We need to use technology in smart ways. We need to ensure that we have an enabling infrastructure within the country if we are using technologies. We also need to be quite smart about the way in which we think about curriculum, teaching and learning, research, organization of that. We need to ask the hard questions about what is it that we are teaching in the 21st century, given that a great deal of knowledge is already available to students at the touch of a button, and they can cross-check information. So we really are in a place where we have to fundamentally rethink what is it that we are doing in higher education, how we are doing it, and whether we have the required pillars in place to enable it.
Professor Smith?
Yeah, so just a couple of closing thoughts from me. We've talked about digital, and I think all of the things you've heard in this session have indicated both the opportunity that's brought, but some of the challenges. But that's only part of the space, in the sense that there's nothing like, for example, going and visiting somewhere to really understand it, to really understand other people. You have to see it, you have to smell it, you have to feel it, and all those types of things. And technology, although it's fantastic, can't do many of those things.
Yeah.
And the final thing, which is another dimension, is how does technology help us meet sustainability challenges as well? Because there's the sustainability of stopping people actually moving, which is great, reducing the amount of movement. But technology itself often has a significant carbon footprint in its own right. So don't forget that all those servers chugging out all of that information there's a lot of carbon going into the atmosphere. So you just have to worry about that as well. So there's a lot of issues there, and it's not easy.
100%, it is definitely not easy. No question about it. We've got to think about the future. Climate change is certainly with us, and we need to be thinking about it in particular, of course, in our education. Professor Kunin?
Yeah, just 2 points. One that draws on something that Professor Smith just said, and that is, in a sense, saying we should have the right education for the right student in the right way. Different students will want different types of education. Some will want face-to-face, some will want mixed mode, some will want entirely online. And we have to recognize that that's not only because they want different things, but their learning styles may require different things. So we need to find a way of allowing students to have different types of experiences. And some of that will be online, some of that will be utilizing campuses, and many universities now, Lancaster University, for example, and Curtin University, have campuses in many parts of the world where students can go to different campuses to have different experiences as part of an online experience. So I think that's fundamental. It's not one way for all students. We have to have multiple ways for different students. And the second point is that while the smart university may be part of the future, it needs to retain an ability to give students some kind of interactive, direct social experience. And that's going to require really interesting work in artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and augmented reality to allow students who want to access it any time to still have a real interactive experience. And I think that's going to be fundamental to its success.
Yeah, the machines must not completely take over. You still need people in there, and the social impact, we can't overemphasize its importance. Thank you, sir. Professor Martin, you have the final word.
Yes, look, I agree with Seth in terms of the smart university and what we actually do to create a social experience of some sort and opportunities to interact with other students. That's absolutely critical. But from everything I've heard and continue to see, I still think we're not getting it quite right in terms of designing our online experiences. I still think we have a mindset, and that mindset is we're going to keep all of the things from the past, and we're just going to modify them a little bit so that they fit online. And I see so much of that. Even today, our discussion about examinations, for example, is a case in point. We try and fit examinations to go with an online because we've always had examinations. I think we've just got to clear the slate, wipe things clean, and develop a model.
Diego, can you see if someone's at the door?
Okay.
Sorry, to see a model.
It's okay.
I'll start again. See a model that is actually going to be fit for purpose. That's what I believe. We just got too many relics from the past that are actually there still, and I think we need to change that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Professor Kunin, tell him to keep listening. I can't come through the door yet, but yeah, we are done.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all.
I thought that I was muted.
That's part of the problem, isn't it? If you were in classroom, there wouldn't have been the interruption. There we are, our movement out of the classroom into all sorts of spaces, including our homes, of course, takes us everywhere. Thank you, ladies, gentlemen. It's been a fascinating discussion. I wanted to give you the results of that poll that we ran on CNBCAfrica.com and on LinkedIn. And the final results that I'm reading out to you read, has the move to online education positive, negative? It is a positive, 54.9% versus 45%, decisive. And the second question was, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on education? Compromised quality coming out top there, 52.9% versus 47.1%. I have to thank my panelists very, very heartily indeed. That's Professor Gary Martin, CEO, Executive Director at the Australia Institute of Management, Western Australia, Dr. Curtis Menon, Senior Director, Division of Teaching Excellence at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Mark Smith, President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Southampton, and last but not least, Professor Seth Kunin, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Global at Curtin University in Australia. Thank you very much for your thoughts. I wanted to leave you with some random facts. Do you know which is the oldest high school in the world? I found out last night. Shishi High School in China, oldest high school in the world. Oldest university, come back to Mother Africa. It is Ez Zitouna in Tunis. That's Tunisia.